Hello and welcome. In today's tutorial, we're going to look at the next data structure, that is data frames. Basically, we're going to see what a data frame is. We're going to also see how to create a data frame, how to access data in a data frame, how to rename columns in a data frame, and then we'll learn how to index by row and column in data frames, as well as adding columns to an existing data frame. We'll also look at how to remove columns from an existing data frame and then merging two data frames together. So in our previous lesson, we looked at how to create vectors. We saw what vectors were. We saw some tiny little things we could do, okay, to vectors. Now, in today's video, like I said, we're going to study more on data frames. Data frames are very similar to tables or spreadsheet. Okay, it is basically used to store data in a tabular format. Okay, now to create data frames in R, we make use of a function called DataFrames. So we make use of a function called data.frames. So this function is what we're going to use in creating data frames. Now, as you can see on my screen, I have objects. Okay, objects. The first object is names of students. Okay, and it's a character vector storing the names of some students I have. Then the next object is the student index number, which is a numeric vector. Okay, and it's harboring or storing the index numbers of students. Same for the scores in maths test and then scores in science test. So what I want you to do, okay, so that we be on the same page, is that you're going to create these vectors, okay, or these vectors or these objects, okay, and then you assign just like I have done to them. Now once we have done that, our environment is empty, so we'll need to run them. Okay, so we're done. It has appeared in our environment. Now when one starts with R programming, okay, the main concern is to um, ensure that the code you write is really working. There are no errors in the code. But then one important thing we also consider as programmers is that the line of code you write should be clear enough, should be readable. Okay, if we should pass the code to someone else, the person should be able to see what you are writing. The person should be able to understand what you are writing with no problems at all. Now, why am I saying this? If you look at the objects I have created, you realize that there are no spaces, okay, between them. Okay, if you look at the elements in objects named student index number, you see that the values in there have no spaces. I mean, they are more of clustered together. All right, so you could go manually by using the spacebar key to space, okay, them, but that is going to be a long way. So the short um, way to do that is to just highlight, okay, the line of codes you've written that are very clustered or don't appear, okay, very well to the, or very pleasing to the eye. You just highlight them, and then you go to this magic wand, okay, or rod you see here, and you click. And once you click, you would also click on the, or you would choose the format code option. So once you click on that, you could see that our code has been formatted. All right, you can now appreciate whatever has been done here. They are well spaced. It's appearing very nice, as you can see, compared to the clustered ones. Good. Now to continue, I said in creating data frames we make use of the function called data.frames. Okay, and some important features or characteristics of data frames are that they are two-dimensional. Okay, meaning that they have columns and rows. Okay, the next important feature is that for data frames, each column is a vector. Okay, each column of a data frame is a vector. I would explain that in this video. So we have our first object, that is names of students, and then our next object, that is student index numbers, and then we have the next one, that is scores in a math test, and then scores in a science test. Now, to create a data frame for, let's say, names of students and the index numbers of students, okay, we're still going to use the data.frame function. So let's create an object to store the data frame we are coming to work on, okay, or the data frame we are coming to create. So let's say the first object is going to be I like to call it df1. Okay, so data frame 1, and then we assign, okay, whatever data frames you are coming to create into that object. Like I said, we'll make use of the data.frame function. So we say data.frame, okay, and we click on it. Now the argument, okay, that is going to be inside this round bracket are the object names. You don't have to keep them in quotes or anything, because they are just object names, and the data frame functions understands that. So we will just input the object name. So the first one has to do with names of students, like I said, and then the second object is students index numbers. Now let's run this and see. So once we run this, it has been stored in R's memory, and now let's call df1. Keep track of the console, see what happens at the console. You could see that a very presentable table has been shown here. Okay, you have your column names of students, and we have the students names, and we have index numbers of students, and the index numbers are as well listed, okay, below. So like I was saying, this names of students you are seeing here is our first vector. So each column is a vector, okay. So this column is our first vector, named what? Names of students. And this column is our second vector, named student index numbers. Now let's create a second data frame. Now the second data frame we are going to create, we're going to use the student index numbers and then scores in math test. So we'll say data frame 2, okay. So students, so data.frame, so students index numbers, and then we go to the scores in math test. Now when we are done, we'll run it, and when we call it, okay, you could see that the data frame has also been created. Okay, so we have students index numbers and then scores in math test. So basically this is how to create a data frame. Now one thing you will note is that for data frames, each column could store a different data type. Okay, so for the first one we did, you see the first column was a character vector. Okay, it was a character vector, it was storing just characters. Now the next column, okay, was more of a numeric vector, storing numerical values. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to put across is that data frames gives you the flexibility to knit together character data types and um, any other data types as well, okay, so far as they exist as independent vectors. Now the next thing to also note is that for the vectors that you will want to knit in, or you would want to put together into a data type, those vectors must be of the same length. So now we would like to check the length of the vectors. So let's check the length of vectors. Okay, so I've placed a comment there. So let's check the length of names of students first. It says the length of names of students is 6. Now we could check the length of the students index numbers, and you see that they have the same equal length, 6 and 6. So now data frames can work easily for these ones. But if you have differences in the length of vectors, then sorry, data frames won't really do the job. Would rather probably use a list, or you're going forward you will see. All right, so let me just, I don't want to cross my my border, okay, or the border set for me. We'll limit ourselves to data frames for now. So here in data frame 1, I have 2 vectors. You can put as many vectors or objects you want to knit together. If you want 3 tables or 3 columns or 4 columns, 5 columns, you could keep on adding and adding and adding. And over here, there's no need for you to bring any concatenate, okay, function. There's no need for you to bring the small c with the round brackets. All right, you just call the data frame function and then you just input the objects in there. All right, now the next thing we're going to look at is how to access data in a data frame. How to access data in a data frame. So how to access data in a data frame. Okay, so we have our first data frame, that is df1, our second data frame, that is df2. Okay, now to access a particular data in a data frame, you basically have to subset that data. Okay, basically what we're trying to do is to subset that data. So you could use the $sign, okay, the name of the data frame, and then you use a $sign, okay, to choose between what columns you want to access data on, or what columns you want to subset. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, let's say we want to subset a column from df1. So we have df1 is the object name for our data frame we created. Okay, and then we type, or we key in the $sign, and once you key in the $sign, you will see that the number of columns, or the names of the columns in df1 pops up. This way, if I choose names of students and I run, it's only going to give me, in the console you could see, it's only giving me the name, it's only giving me the names of the students, okay, in df1. Okay, just that column. So what if we want to call out the next column name in df1? The same thing, the $sign. So df1, okay, $sign, student index numbers, and then we run, and you see that the student index numbers have been listed for you. So supposing you want to calculate the mean, you want to do anything to this, you can easily do that. If you want to calculate the mean, because we have subsetted the data we want, for instance the student index numbers, we could just go mean, okay, and just key in that here, and then when we run, you could see that we have the mean of the score, which is 428.1667. That is the mean of the index numbers, though it doesn't really make sense. Why would we want to find the means of index numbers? Yeah, now this is how to access a column or a data, okay, in data frames. This is how to access. So we could use this is the first method. So we could use the $sign, okay, or you could as well use the squared bracket. So I'll put I'll leave a comment here. So using the dollar sign. Then the next one is we want to use, so using the squared bracket. Okay, so same thing. Before we subset any column from a data frame, we need to call out the parent data frame or the parent object name, which is df1. Okay, once we call out the object name, we could use the square bracket, and then if you know the number of columns or the positions of the columns you want to subset, you could just input the position. So if I want to subset the names of students and I know it is in position 1 or column 1, I could just enter column 1, and when I run, you will see that the column has been given. Okay, the column has been given names of students. Now, what is the difference between this, the dollar sign, and the squared, okay, bracket with the position? Now you could see that the square bracket with the position returns the column exactly as it is in the table, whereas the dollar sign returns it as a vector format. Okay, so depending on what you want to use, you could go with whichever one, okay, you would prefer most. Now, if we want to subset the index numbers of students, we go df1, okay, subset 2, because we know it's in column 2. So we then run and we have the student index numbers as well. Okay, now if you would like to also subset using the names of the columns, you can do that. So I would say using the names of the columns in the data frame. Okay, so the same thing, we'll need to call the parent data frame. So the parent data frame is df1. Okay, so when we subset, we now input the name of the column. Now, supposing we did not know the names of the column, we could use the function called names, okay, to get the names of the columns. Okay, so to get the names of the columns, we'll use the names function. So names, and then what columns do we want to find? It's df1. Once we run, you would see that in the console you have the names of the column. So it says that the first column is names of students, the next column is what? Index numbers of students. Now you could easily take this, copy this, and come and put it in the df1, okay, we just created. And once you run this, you see that we now have the column for the names of students. Okay, so depending on what you want to do, if you want to go by the dollar sign, you can go by a dollar sign. If you want to go by the squared bracket, you can go by the squared bracket. If you want to go by the names of the columns, you could as well go by the names of the columns. All right, so that being said, we'll want to move on to the next thing, which is renaming columns in a data frame. So we want to see how to rename columns in a data frame. I want to see how to rename columns in a data frame. So let's do that. So how to rename columns in a data frame. All right. Now to rename columns in a data frame, just like you saw me use the names function here, just like you saw me use the names function here, you're still going to use the same names function. Okay, so we could have names, okay, and then df1. We know what df1's columns are. Okay, we know it is name of students, okay, and we know it is index number of students, or index or students index numbers, right? So what if we want to um change the names of let's say the columns. Okay, so names function, the object, the data frame object name, and then now you assign the new names to it. Okay, so we have two columns there, so we'll want to change basically I want to change basically the first column and the second column as well. So since there are two, we use the concatenate to knit them as one. Okay, so what do we want to name it now? Now we would like to say class 3. Okay, and then the next one is going to be, let's say, telephone. So telephone number. Let me just type it, telephone number. Okay, now once we run this, it has worked. So if you call df1 now and you run, you see that your column names have been changed. We have class 3 and then telephone number being the new column names. Okay, so this is how to rename in data frames, how to rename columns in data frames. I would like us to work with the same column name, so I'll just have to change it back. So let's say the same thing, so names. Okay, names df1, and then I would assign, okay, let me take the names from here, this and that. So I'll just assign this to that and bring a comma. Okay, so now when we call df1, we have our previous column names to it. All right, now the next thing is how to index. Okay, how to index by rows and by columns. Okay, so let's do that. Indexing by rows and columns. Now if you remember, I said data frames are two-dimensional, okay, having rows and columns. Okay, so we could use this characteristic, okay, to subset a particular row, okay, or a particular column from a data frame. Now supposing we want to subset a student's name like Caroline. Okay, you could all see that Caroline falls under row 2. Okay, and what column? Column 1. Okay, so to do that, we will just call the data frame we created, the object. Okay, that is df1. So df1. Okay, and we make use of the square bracket. Now we are not going to subset this time around. We are going to get a particular data or a particular element from the data frame. Okay, now here, what you see here, okay, you will notice that I have brought a comma. Okay, now the first portion before the comma is for rows, and then after the comma, okay, it's for columns. It's designated for columns. So if you want to subset a particular row, you put in the row index and then the column index to get it. So assuming we want to subset Caroline, okay, from df1, we could see that Caroline falls under row 2, column 1. So here we'll enter our row. So we said row 2, and then what column? Column 1. Okay, so once we run, you'll see in the console that Caroline has been pulled out for us. In the same way, if we want to subset Israel from df1, we could find Israel in row 1, column 1. So we go df1, square bracket, row 1, column 1, right? So once we run this, you would see that Israel has also been subsetted. What if we want to subset the index number for Caroline? Okay, you could see that the index number for Caroline could be found on row 2, column 2. Okay, we could find Caroline's index number from row 2, column 2. So we would say df1, the same thing. Okay, row 2, column 2. Okay, and once we run, you will see that Caroline's index number pops up at the console, 256. Okay, basically this is how to index by rows and by columns. Now, what if you would not only want to subset the student's name, but you want to subset the student's name together with the index number? Okay, so to do that, so if it is Caroline we are looking at, okay, Caroline's name and index number could be found on row 2. All right, so to subset this, we're going to first enter the data frame name or the object name, which is df1, and then row 2. Okay, forget about the column, we don't really need to enter anything there. What we want is for it to extract the whole row for us. Okay, so once we run that, you will see in the console that the names of students column is there. What do you see? You see Caroline. And then the student index number column is there. What do you see? You see 256. The same way, if we want to subset, let's say Desmond, okay, Desmond um, has a row index of 5. So we go df1, row 5, and then a comma, leaving the column. We do not specify the column. This will make R extract the whole row for us. So once we run, you see that Desmond has also appeared here. All right. Okay. So now we've seen how to index by rows and by columns in data frames. I think we'll have to now go to the next thing on the menu, which is how to add columns to a data frame. Okay, how to add columns to a data frame. So adding columns to a data frame. Okay, so to add columns to a data frame, basically there are numerous ways of doing that. Okay, but I will show you two easy ways of doing that. So the first easy way of doing that is using the $sign. Okay, and the next one is using cbind, which is column bind. Okay, so you remember we created vectors. Okay, our first vector, we had names of students, student index numbers, and we knitted this and that. Okay, we knitted them as one data frame, and then we knitted student index numbers and scores in masters as the second data frame. So what I want us to do is to add the scores in science test to df2. Okay, we want to add the scores in science test to df2. Now to do that, okay, we're going to call the object name df2. Okay, and then we use the $sign. Okay, but the trick is this: since we are not really interested in already existing columns over here, we'll ignore this and rather input the new column name we wish to give to that particular column we are intending to create. So we want to call that column scores in, let's say, science test. Okay, now once we have done this, we just have to assign that vector to it. So what is the name of the vector containing the scores? It is scores in science test. Okay, so we just run this and it has worked. So when we call df2, initially df2 had only two columns: students index numbers and scores in mass test. But now when you run it, you will see that df2 in the console now has three columns. Okay, the student index numbers, scores in mass test, and then scores in science tests. Okay, so this is the first um, way of doing that, easily using the dollar sign to do that. Now, like I said, you could as well use the data cbind. Sorry, so cbind. So let me just put a comment here using dollar sign. Okay, and now the next one is using cbind. Okay, it's a function that binds the columns, okay, of one existing vector to the other. Okay, so to use cbind, we would have just said cbind, or we would have just called cbind and then called df2. Okay, so df2 and then comma sign sorry, score in science test. Okay, you're still going to achieve the same thing. Once I run this, you will see that I have, okay, I have it here. Okay, student index numbers, scores in math test, scores in science test, and if you check down, we also have scores in science test again. This is because we had already used the dollar sign to fit that column in there. Okay, so you could go either by the dollar sign, you create the column you want by assigning a particular name of that column to against the dollar sign, and then you assign the vector object, okay, to it. Or you could go by using the cbind. All right, so now let's head to the next thing on the menu. Okay, so the next thing on the menu is removing columns from a data frame. We want to see how to remove columns from a data frame. So, we just added scores and science test to df2. So let's try and remove scores and science test column from df2. Now to do that, we're going to call df2. Sorry, let me just add this comment quickly. Removing columns from data frame. Yes, so like I was saying, we want to remove the scores in science test we initially added to df2. Now to do that, we need to call the object, which is df2, okay, and then we use the dollar sign, okay, and we select the particular column we wish to remove. So in this case, we wish to remove scores in science test column. So we click on the scores in science test. Okay, and what do? We assign now to it. Okay, we assign now to it. So once you run, it has worked. If you now call df2, you will realize that df2 will no longer have the scores in science test column in there anymore. Okay, now check the console. You see that now we now have only two columns: scores in mass test and then students index numbers. These are the only two columns we have. Now finally, uh, not finally, but then for this particular video, we'll conclude on how to merge columns together. Okay, we'll conclude on how to, merge data frames together. So let's do that. So merging data frames together. Probably that is how I would like to put it. Okay, so to merge data frames together, we would want to use the DF1 and DF2 to demonstrate this particular uh, um, process or method of achieving this. So I'll first want us to see what is in DF1. So if I run DF1, please take note of the console. This is what is in DF1: names of students and index numbers of students. Now, if I check that of DF2 and I run, what is in DF2? We have student index numbers and scores in maths test. Okay, now to merge these columns together, we're going to use the function merge. Okay, there's a function called merge that merges two columns together. Okay, so we'll call the function merge. Okay, and when we key in the tab key, it would say, it will give you these options. Okay, the first options, which is X, says that data frames or objects to be coerced to one. So what is the data frame or the object we wish to coerce as one? So the first one is df1. Okay, then we give a comma and then press the tab key to get the next argument. So the next argument is y. Now the y is data frame 2, that is df2. Okay, df2. Those are the two columns we actually want to fit together. Okay, so df2, and then we enter the final argument. Okay, by. So basically the merge function was to know, okay, you have df1 and df2, you want to merge them together. Great, I understand that. Okay, what is that unique characteristic in df1 and df2 that would easily, okay, help me to merge them together? Okay, and if you would pay close attention, the the column, okay, that will make things very easy for the merge function to merge these two data frames together is their index numbers, because that is the unique thing here. We have, for df2 we have index numbers, and for df1 we also have what? Index numbers. Okay, so we would want to merge by their index numbers. So we'll measure by their index numbers. So first we'll bring a quote, okay, and then we enter the name. So student index numbers. We want to merge by the student index numbers. Okay, so we enter that here and then we run. Look at this. So so in the first column we have names of students, student index numbers, names of students, and then the scores in maths tests. Okay, these are the unique columns in df1 and df2. Okay, so now I would want to leave you with this tiny quiz. Okay, is it a quiz or probably to see if you understand what I've been saying so far? Now, do you think that the merge we just did here, the merging of the two data frames we just did here, has been stored in R's environment? If yes, leave it in the comment section. If no, also leave it in the comment section. And for both answers, okay, explain why you think this is so.